Welcome to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. I'm Tracy Chernoff, and I've spent my entire professional career in HR. Each week, we'll explore the delicate balance between people and business with the aim to reconnect the two and create meaningful outcomes. Listen in as I share my own experiences, challenge the status quo, and chat with guests from various industries about our mission to bring the human back to human resources. Hi, everyone. Welcome back to the Bringing the Human Back to Human Resources podcast. Don't forget to rate, review, and subscribe wherever you're catching this episode, whether you are listening or watching on Spotify or YouTube or anywhere else that you might be able to watch the video version that I might not be aware of. This week, I have Michael Timms on as my guest. He is an internationally sought-after speaker, consultant, and best-selling author who teaches leaders how to inspire greatness in their teams. Michael is the author of the book, How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability, which is the world's #1 leadership coach, Marshall Goldsmith, called the ultimate guide for embracing accountability as a leader, and is the basis of his renowned TED Talk. And by the way, I listened to the TED Talk. It is fabulous, and maybe we'll even talk about it a little bit today. But it is pretty cool that Marshall Goldsmith gave you that shout out. So
yeah,
well done. Yeah, that's
Thank
awesome. His first book, Michael's first book, Succession Planning That Works, received critical acclaim as an invaluable guide for identifying and taking advantage of talent within organizations. And we will be speaking quite a bit about succession planning this week, so stay tuned for that. And through his company, Avail Leadership, he partners with organizations to foster high-performance cultures of teamwork and excellence. And outside of work, he enjoys spending quality time with his family and pursuing challenging outdoor adventures in remote wilderness locations, which I'm sure you have many stories around. Yeah. Any crazy fun trips coming up?
I don't have anything coming up. The last trip I did was last major adventure was in Peru. I climbed a 19,000 foot mountain in Peru. So that was pretty cool.
Wow. Amazing. I love that.
Yeah.
Well, the more you know, and I always love a little fun fact about someone to kind of kick us off. So, one of the things that you and I were talking about before we started recording is that I think it'll be really helpful before we dive into succession planning to talk about this idea of claiming your leadership power and what your leadership kind of framework is when you think about leadership, at least what that framework is, especially considering you've done a TED Talk. It was really compelling, I think, and it does lend to this idea and notion around succession planning and how we can do it effectively. So maybe we start there.
Yeah, sure. So the TED Talk, so the book is How Leaders Can Inspire Accountability. When I was accepted to speak at the TED conference, the head of the conference, he's like, "Don't use the word accountability in your TED Talk because everybody's going to fall asleep." And he's right. He's right. People don't want to talk about accountability, especially. And when leaders bring me in to speak about accountability, they're really thinking, Michael, I need you to help us make our employees more accountable. And so I have learned that I have to do a bit of a bait and switch and make them think that I'm going to be telling them that, hey, the secret to success is how to make your people accountable. But actually, the secret to success is if we work on the leaders first and help them set an even higher standard of accountability, that is the difference that actually starts to inspire other people's behavior and makes other people feel safe to say, hey, you know what, that was my bad, and here's what I'm going to do to fix it. But they need a model. Okay, employees need a model. Followers need a model, and they need their leaders to do that. And that is a very, very rare thing to see in corporate leadership, is leaders to say, yeah, that's on me, or this is my, hey folks, we are not performing where we want to perform. And here's my part. Here's how I contributed to where we are today. Let's diagnose this and figure out how we can, further diagnose this and figure out how we can move forward. It doesn't happen enough, but when it does happen, it's pretty amazing how it transforms other people's behavior and their willingness to take ownership for problems and solutions. So that's so I know I'm speaking to HR folks for the most part, and now my secret is is that really the trick is we're trying to get your leaders to step up their accountability first.
Right. I love that. I mean, I can understand the feedback around, accountability will make people fall asleep, but I also think accountability is so important that I'm like, we've got to say it somewhere. And ownership is that other operative word, that when leaders do feel a sense of ownership in whatever they might be doing, that you hope and expect better outcomes. And frankly, you don't even have to be a leader to demonstrate ownership. I mean, this is kind of, it's pervasive when when anyone within an organization feels ownership toward that overall goal, or whatever the organization is kind of working toward in that moment. And so when I think about succession planning, naturally, yes, we are speaking to, on the majority, HR leaders or people looking to break into HR. Some people might not have ever had exposure to succession planning from a tactical standpoint. They might not know exactly what it entails. But of course, from an intrinsic standpoint, we know, okay, well, you have to have a succession plan. Who's the backup to this leader? Who's the backup to that person you're going to promote? But that is just a shaving off the tip of the iceberg. That is not even the tip of the iceberg itself. So maybe we have to start a little bit more broad and kind of explain what succession planning is and looks like, and why it's an activity that requires so much involvement outside of just an HR person.
Yeah. And I think probably the first step in understanding succession planning is to understand, what you just described. A lot of people think of succession planning, but that's actually replacement planning. Replacement planning is basically, it's a paper exercise. It's who's the backup. Really, the key difference between succession planning, which is what we're trying to get to, and replacement planning, is the difference is the focus. And the focus in replacement planning is who is the backup. The focus in succession planning is developing people.
Right.
And that's where I think a lot of people, a lot of HR folks in particular, kind of get confused about what succession planning really is. And that 90%, if 90% of your succession plan doesn't revolve around helping people develop, you're probably talking about replacement planning.
Yeah, I think that's a fair point. And frankly, I don't know that the majority of organizations do a great job at either, actually, replacement planning or succession planning, right? So there's an overall gap, I think, in most, maybe not most organizations, but a lot. At least many of the organizations I've worked in have struggled to really be proactive in how they plan and develop their talent. And when I think about the experiences and exposure that I've had to succession planning and replacement planning, we can use both phrases. Succession planning is really something that is so proactive, because you're not thinking about, okay, this person is going to be the replacement to that person. You're thinking, how am I going to help that employee, that person, to be the best version of themselves in this role, in another role, this company, at a different company, and what is it that they're looking to achieve overall? That's kind of what development comes down to, frankly.
Yeah, I love it. And actually, in the word, and you understand that, like, you've got the essence of it, because the word that you used is proactive. And that's also a key difference between replacement planning and succession planning, is being proactive versus reactive. Some of the key problems that I see with HR folks is that, you and I were talking about this earlier, is that most organizations do not have an effective succession plan. I think actually there was a survey that said, like, basically something like 2 or 3% of executives were satisfied with the succession plan that they have in place, even if they do have a succession plan. And the reason is that from my experience, the reason for this is because HR folks feel that they need to be an expert in everything: performance management, compensation, benefits, succession planning, everything, right? And so they feel that I got to know. When in the reality, they don't know how to do succession planning. And so what do? They go to Google, they Google succession planning, and what pops up is the 9 box. Which is, pretty much the one tool that I think people, you got to have a 9 box. You got to have a 9 box. The 9-box was developed in the 1970s by a consulting group. Let me just ask you this. Is there anything in your organization? Is there any system, process, framework, intellectual capital that your company relies on today to get their work done that is based in the 1970s? And I'll just beat you to the punch. The answer is no, right? Because the 9-box is essentially unchanged in that's 55 years. So if you think that if you equate the 9-box with succession planning, again, please, for the love of God, please do not engage in succession planning on your own. Now, I recognize that this is very self-serving of me to say this, but I don't build my own house. I don't make my own clothes. I don't grow most of my own food. And there's a reason for that, because other people can do it far more effectively and efficiently than I can. That's why we specialize in certain things. And so my first ask is for it doesn't have to be me. You don't have to ask me to help you out with succession planning, but please get somebody who has done this with many different organizations, because although succession planning isn't rocket science, it is complicated in that there are a number of ways that succession planning can go sideways on you. And you only really can wrap your head around all those things once you have done it with a number of organizations. I didn't really kind of have my my succession planning model figured out until about the 5th or 6th company that I did this with. And I've done this with more than 20 companies. So you can imagine every time that I'm doing this, I'm learning a little bit more. I'm like, oh, okay, that's going to make it better. That's going to make it better. That's going to make it more easily digestible. This is going to be easier to implement. And you do need a guide who has done this a number of times to help you avoid some of the key pitfalls that I could share more pitfalls with you.
Yeah, no, I think that makes sense. And actually, I would love to go back to the 9-box for a moment, because that is a very interesting point that we're not necessarily using something that's 55 years old in the same capacity as it was built then today. And I think when I think about the 9-box, it's true that the definitions are pretty much unchanged. I do like one thing about the 9-box that I do like is that you can, there's a moment of calibration across an organization around performance and potential. The challenge with the 9-box is that you're relying on leaders to understand what potential means and what performance means or looks like. And that is so subjective, not only person to person, but team to team and organization to organization. And so you could have someone who is like a 9 on the 9-box, future leader, depending on if they have it inverted or not. I see the 9 as the 9-box, or the 9 as the future leader category, or top performance, top potential. And that could be true for one organization or one leader or one department or team. And it could be inverted in another team, department, organization, or for a different leader. And I think that is the challenge in using something like that with people who are just inherently people and subjective based on their own biases or expectations and things like that. So is there a better alternative for something like that when it comes to calibrating performance and potential?
Yeah, and I think first of all, let's talk about the good. The good is, and I've heard some HR professionals say something similar in that, hey, it allows us to actually talk about our people. We're not even doing that. So I mean, it's a tool.
It's something
that allows us to have be talking about our people. So sure, I'll give you that. But the key thing is that most succession planning, I think in essence, is mostly replacement planning. But most of those discussions, most of kind of the old fashioned way of doing this is let's just spend most of our time talking about people. When in fact, what you really want to be doing is spending most of your time talking to people. And let's get back to, so some of the flaws with the 9-box. So as you pointed out, it's not just understanding the definition of potential. I think it's an extremely arrogant and offensive idea that the senior executives or some management team is going to be able to accurately identify my potential.
Yes, yes, yes. This is a huge, huge point.
So when in fact, and I think most HR professionals should be familiar with this statistic that 70% in the Gallup organization has done a ton of research and nailed down. They're like, look, about 70% of an employee's engagement and performance really is dependent on their direct manager. So if somebody's not performing well, it's like, well, we got a problem employee, or we got a B or a C level employee. Well, there's a
Who's leading them?
Good chance that's on you, manager. Anyways,
yeah.
So one thing is look, my mom 10 years ago wouldn't have been even my mom wouldn't have been able to accurately identify my potential on kind of where I am today, right? How can you, as a manager who doesn't really care about me, think that you're going to be able to accurately identify my potential? And let's be honest. What really goes on in those rooms, for the most part, is that the person with the most influence in those rooms, it's an opportunity for them to drive their agenda by putting their people in key positions. And it's an opportunity for them to talk trash about the people who are not on their team, who are not kind of part of their fiefdom in front of the CEO. So the CEO is listening to this. Well, I'm not, Tracy's a nice person. I'm just not sure she's really up to it. And CEO's listening. So this is a highly political conversation that you should never even be having in the first place, because you aren't qualified, managers and executives, to identify the potential in other people. Do you know who is? Those people, if they have a solid criteria. Right? So let's take identifying performance out of your hands, executives and managers. Let's put it in the people's hands so that they can self-identify. If you have come up with a criteria for leadership that is very simple and very clear, and by the way, most organizations, they call them competency models. Most competency models, if you have one, are so convoluted and complex. And not only are they complex, they don't just describe the perfect leader. They describe the perfect human being that nobody can possibly live up to. Let me give you a better alternative. If you do the work to figure out what are the handful, 3 or 4 most impactful things that you have found that leaders do, the behaviors that they demonstrate, that brings out the best in people, identify those 3 or 4 key competencies, have a number of kind of descriptor points around them, and then let everybody bring their own unique set of talents and skills, right, and strengths. Let the things that made them, why we hired them in the first place. Let everybody bring that uniqueness with them, and then just say, look, all I need you to do is just apply and live up to these 3 or 4 other key leadership competencies. Do these 3 things. It's like, and I know a lot of times HR folks, where they come up with competencies, is to basically Google leadership competencies and they pick their favorites and they end up with about a dozen. Imagine if my wife did that and she Googled husband competencies and she handed me a sheet of paper with 12 husband competencies. Said, Michael, I just need you to be these 12 things. I'd be like, you just described the perfect husband, which I am not the perfect human being, right? That would be extremely demoralizing. And I know it's a criteria I could never live up to. But she said, Michael, just be the person that I married for all the reasons that I married you. And if you just do these 3 or 4 things, that's all I ask of you. That's all I'm asking, for you to be the perfect husband for me. I could do that, right? I could do that. And I said, yeah, I can do 3 or 4 key things. I can focus on 3 or 4 key behaviors to be the best husband for you. And I think if organizations did that, they say, look, we just need you to do these 3 or 4 things in addition to all those strengths that you bring to the table to be, the most effective leader for our organization. And people can self-identify and say, I am willing to live up to that, or I'm not. And the way, instead of the 9 box, once you have that criteria, what you can do is have a committee that is, and their whole job is simply to say, does this individual live up to this criteria? People who know the individual, who have worked with the individual, who have no political agenda, whose whole key role is simply, does this person live up to this criteria? And believe it or not, I mean, some people are, oh, that's pretty subjective. Believe me, it is not subjective. It becomes very clear very quickly once people start telling stories about that individual, if they live up to that criteria. So there you go. There's a very quick summary of what how succession planning has gone wrong and how you can bring the humanity back into succession planning.
Yeah, I think that's great. I mean, I really agree with pretty much everything that you've said. I think that there are some, the one thing that I would say I maybe not struggle with, but I think could be a reality is that there are organizations that have nothing. They have no infrastructure at all. And so in a way, it kind of feels like, well, if they're using the 9-box because this is something that someone's brought in because that's their experience or the most exposure they've had to succession planning or planning in general, it's better than nothing. And at least it starts the conversation. But at the same time, I totally agree with you that there's such a better way of looking at and helping people to look at their own performance and potential.
I would argue that the 9-box is not better than nothing. I would say that it's worse than nothing. Because,
oh, really?
Well, who does the 9-box work for? It works for the most politically savvy senior executives. That's who want it.
That's fair. That's totally fair.
Once you implement it, those senior executives who have the most influence in the organization, A, they will not want to let it go. B, the board of directors, they're like, oh, well, that's all we know is the 9-box. Why would you get rid of it? Right? Because, presumably your board of directors is full of baby boomers. And if they have any experience with succession planning, they will be familiar with the 9-box. And they're like, oh, well, that's succession planning. So I would suggest it's worse because, again, it forces you to talk about people
versus to them.
And it reinforces the idea that you have the authority. You have this omniscient insight, and you can peer into the soul of the people in your organization and identify their potential, which is a totally false. It's a false, and it's a offensive idea, I think. So
yeah, that's a really good point.
Look, spend your time. Here's where I would spend your time: is having focus groups within your organization. It doesn't have to be a ton of them, just maybe 3 focus groups, one with a senior management team, one with managers, one with employees, and ask them to tell you stories about, hey, when has our organization really nailed it, right? It doesn't have to be like a huge success story, but tell me about some success stories here. So identify these success stories and say, what were the behaviors that enabled that success story to happen or led to that success story? And once you start to hear enough of these success stories and you start to hear enough of these behaviors, you will start to see patterns emerge. And that's how I work with organizations to help them identify their leadership, their handful of key leadership competencies. And it's not based on what I think they should adopt. It's based on what has actually led to their success. Right.
Well, I really appreciate that you are challenging really the status quo here. I mean, that's kind of one of the fundamental parts of this podcast is that we should really challenge what we believe, period, and also what we believe is the right way or the best way or the only way. And as someone who's generally used the 9-box in like every organization that I've ever worked in, I can really appreciate what you're saying, that it is very politically charged. And you're 100% right. I've seen 9-boxes used well in apolitical, or pseudo apolitical organizations and environments. And I've also seen the downfall of the 9-box in hyper political environments and what that means for the person who is being talked about rather than spoken to or with.
Right.
So I can really appreciate that. And one of my final questions for you actually is how you, when you're working with organizations, how you generally navigate size of organization and maybe even some differences that might come up. Like, are there inherent differences when it comes to succession planning for smaller organizations or small businesses compared to medium or larger, maybe even Fortune 100, 500 companies?
Yeah, and I think it's the scope, and I think that's actually one of the other pitfalls is that HR tends to, when they run succession planning, they try to, they start off with this giant scope and they're going to do all these positions, and that's where it's just going to grind to a screeching halt. But the smaller your organization, first of all, there are fewer opportunities for people to move up in a smaller organization. And I think succession planning, really when you should get quite serious about succession planning on a kind of an organizational level, is around 100 employees, is when you really should, that's when you really start to need to think about it. Before that point, it's basically like, hey, it's having a discussion. Do we have anybody in the organization that could possibly in a few years move up for maybe, 3 or 4 key roles within this organization, maybe 5 key roles within the organization. And then, if so, let's just focus on those 3 or 4, 5 individuals and see what can we do to fast track their development to help prepare them to take on that role. So, so maybe it's a little bit more replacement planning, focus, but you're really, transitioning on like, hey, let's focus on the people and have discussions with the people. What can we do to fast track your development to prepare you for, this role? So, that's what I would do up until you get to kind of 100 employees. Then you can start to, broaden the scope a little bit more.
Right. No, that's really helpful. And I like that it's, we don't have to necessarily overcomplicate things. It's kind of a matter of what the organization needs, and not only in that moment, but also looking ahead and what they can reasonably even kind of discuss. Like if a company is 50 employees or less, and they're not really looking to scale much more than that in the next 5 years, then you're right. Is it really succession in that organization, or is it maybe developing people so that they are the most fulfilled possible, and then if they leave, they can go and take on that next level role with a lot of aptitude. I think a lot of companies are really afraid of that, of losing someone and them going on to bigger and better things. But it's like, well, if you're developing people, then actually they're probably going to be more engaged, and they're going to look more fondly on their experience with your organization. So there's really no loss in developing people.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, just to tie in, we had talked about earlier about my my TEDx talk to succession planning. Honestly, before you start to think about leadership competencies, I'd strongly suggest that you watch my TEDx talk, because those are going to be some key leadership competencies that I think every organization should have embedded in the fabric of their culture. So again, the name of the TED Talk is How to Claim Your Leadership Power. I think that's probably, honestly, a good starting point to think about leadership competencies.
That's really helpful. And we will definitely link your TED Talk in the show notes so that everyone listening can grab it. And I think it's only like 11 or 12 minutes. I mean, it's really, it's not to say that it's a fast listen, but it's not something that you have to set aside so much time for. You could do it.
Yeah.
You could listen during your commute in the morning or in the evening. And I thought it was really well done. So Michael, thank you so much for joining the podcast and challenging even the way that I kind of see some of these things. I think it's great. I think it's important. It's why I was excited to have you on, because, there's no value in listening to our own echo chamber or shouting into our own echo chamber. We have to see other things and other opportunities, other ways of working, other ways of succession planning in this case. And I think it's been really helpful, hopefully for the listeners as well. So if anyone wants to connect with you and realize that they too do not have to build their own homes, and actually they probably never will, where can they connect with you?
Honestly, if you just Google Michael Timms, you'll find me. You'll find my website. You'll find the TED Talk. And that's probably just the best way to find me.
Amazing. And we'll link anything that you've shared with us. We will link for sure. And again, thank you so much for joining the podcast this week.
Great. Thanks so much for having me.
Hey, just before you go, don't forget to subscribe to this show so that you are the first to hear when an episode drops each week. And maybe leave a 5-star review and a comment about how much you loved this episode. Plus, if you have someone in mind who would really enjoy this episode, make sure you share it with them. Thank you so much for tuning in, and I will see you next week.